What if I told you the original folklore that inspired Maleficent contained stories so violent that Disney couldn't show even a fraction of the true horror? The misunderstood fairy who cursed a baby because she wasn't invited to a party? The complex villain whose backstory revealed tragic motivations and eventual redemption? Here's what Disney discovered when they researched the authentic European folklore. The 13th fairy from traditional Sleeping Beauty stories wasn't just evil. She was a force of absolute destruction, who brought death, torture, and cannibalism to entire kingdoms. In the original folklore, this fairy doesn't just curse one baby. She systematically destroys bloodlines, devours children, and brings plagues that kill thousands. Her curses include transforming people into animals to be hunted for sport, causing mothers to eat their own babies, and inflicting diseases that make victims beg for death. The traditional stories weren't about misunderstood motivations or redemption arcs. They were warnings about supernatural forces so evil that entire communities could be destroyed by offending them. Disney faced an impossible choice: show the true horror of European fairy folklore or create a villain audiences could understand and even sympathize with. Want to discover what the original 13th fairy stories actually contained? Stick with us as we go beyond the castle. When Disney began researching Sleeping Beauty in the 1950s, they uncovered fairy tale traditions that stretched back over 600 years across Europe. The story of the uninvited fairy existed in French, German, Italian, and Scandinavian folklore, but these original versions contained elements so disturbing that Disney's story team initially considered abandoning the project entirely. In traditional European folklore, the 13th fairy wasn't a character with complex motivations. She represented the absolute worst aspects of supernatural power. Medieval storytellers used her as a symbol of uncontrollable evil that could destroy everything good in the world without warning or reason. These weren't stories about misunderstood villains or redemption. They were cautionary tales about respecting supernatural forces and understanding that some evil cannot be reasoned with, forgiven, or reformed. In the original folklore traditions, the uninvited fairy doesn't just curse the princess to die on her 15th birthday. She unleashes systematic destruction on the entire kingdom that can last for generations. Traditional versions describe the fairy's curse affecting everyone connected to the royal family. She transforms court members into animals that she hunts for entertainment. She causes pregnant women throughout the kingdom to give birth to monsters. She inflicts plagues that make crops fail and livestock die, leading to mass starvation. Most disturbing of all, many versions include what folklorists call cannibalistic transformations. The fairy forces parents to unknowingly cook and eat their own children, only revealing the truth after the meal is finished. These elements served as warnings about the complete breakdown of natural and social order when supernatural evil is unleashed. The fairy's power in these stories is described as specifically targeting the bonds between parents and children. She delights in corrupting the most sacred relationships, turning love into horror and protection into destruction. Traditional folklore makes clear that the sleeping curse is just the beginning of the kingdom's suffering. While the princess sleeps, the fairy continues her work of destruction throughout the land. Original versions describe how the thorns that surround the castle aren't just protective barriers. They're filled with the corpses of knights, princes, and common people who tried to approach. The fairy keeps these victims alive within the thorns, conscious but unable to move or speak, forced to watch as more people join them. According to the folklore, it is made really clear that the fairy actually feeds on the suffering of these trapped victims. Their pain, well, it sustains her power and lets her spread her influence beyond just the kingdom, reaching out to neighboring lands as well. In some versions, there are these descriptions of the fairy visiting the sleeping princess over and over, tormenting her with nightmares, and these really vivid visions of her kingdom's destruction. The princess, she's still conscious within her sleep, and that means she's forced to witness everything her people go through, all because of her family's slight. European folklore is actually pretty explicit about what happens to kingdoms that are cursed by the 13th fairy. They don't just fall into some peaceful sleep, waiting for true love's kiss. No. They actually descend into supernatural horror that completely transforms the very nature of the land. Traditional stories describe how water turns to blood, how trees grow human faces that scream in agony, and how the ground itself becomes cursed so that nothing wholesome can ever grow there again. The fairy's presence corrupts everything it touches. Animals become predatory and hunt in ways that violate natural law. The weather becomes hostile, with storms that specifically target anyone who shows kindness or tries to help others. Most versions emphasize that this corruption is permanent. Even if the sleeping curse is eventually broken, the kingdom never fully recovers from the supernatural damage the fairy has inflicted. When Disney's team read these traditional versions, they realized the original folklore served completely different purposes than modern family entertainment. Medieval audiences used these stories to process fears about uncontrollable evil, arbitrary divine punishment, and the fragility of civilization. Disney made the creative decision to focus on the sleeping curse element, while completely reimagining the fairy's character and motivations. They transformed an embodiment of absolute evil into a complex character whose actions could be understood, if not justified. The 1959 animated film gave Maleficent clear motivations and limits to her power. The later live-action films went even further, providing her with a sympathetic backstory and eventual redemption arc that doesn't exist anywhere in traditional folklore. This adaptation allowed Disney to use the visual elements and basic plot structure of the fairy tale, while creating content that served modern storytelling needs, rather than medieval cautionary purposes. The difference between folklore's 13th fairy and Disney's Maleficent represents one of the most dramatic character transformations in Disney's adaptation history. The original represented incomprehensible evil that could not be defeated through heroism or goodness alone. Disney's version represents evil that stems from understandable pain and can potentially be overcome through love, understanding, and personal growth. This change reflects modern storytelling's focus on character psychology and the belief that even villains can change. Both approaches serve their respective audiences, but they exist in completely different moral and storytelling universes. So next time you watch any Maleficent film, you'll understand the massive transformation Disney created. From European folklore's embodiment of absolute, incomprehensible evil to a complex character whose actions stem from pain and who can ultimately choose redemption. The original 13th fairy wasn't misunderstood. She was a force of supernatural destruction that medieval audiences used to process their deepest fears about uncontrollable evil. Disney's Maleficent represents modern storytelling's belief that understanding and love can overcome even the darkest motivations. Fellow truth seekers, which dark folklore transformation should we explore next? Drop your vote in the comments. Jafar's serial killer origins in Arabian Nights, the Big Bad Wolf's cannibalistic folklore, or maybe the Sea Witch's original human trafficking. Subscribe to Beyond the Castle to discover how Disney transforms folklore's darkest characters into complex, sympathetic figures. The original evil was more absolute than you imagine.